For 25 episodes, the most important object in television was a door, not a monster, not a set of numbers. A door, a heavy metal hatch, half buried in the floor of a jungle, with no handle, no hinge, and no way in. A man named John Locke found it, became convinced the island itself wanted him to open it, and spent the back half of an entire season of television trying to get through it. And when he finally did, when the dynamite went off and the metal peeled back and there was nothing left between him and the answer, the show did the cruelest, smartest thing it could possibly have done. It cut to black. Jack and Locke standing at the lip of a hole, staring down a shaft that goes into pure darkness. No bottom visible, no light. Credits. Good night, see you in 4 months. It's hard to overstate what that cliffhanger did to people at the time. This was before streaming, before binge watching, before you could simply click next episode and have your curiosity satisfied in 4 seconds. A television show ended on a hole in the ground, and then there was nothing, for months, in every household on the planet that had been watching. There was no way to find out. The only thing to do with the question was carry it around and argue about it. And people did, relentlessly, on forums and at work and in comment threads for an entire summer. Theories about a spaceship, theories about a laboratory, theories that there was nothing down there at all and the whole thing was psychological. An entire audience spent months as amateur detectives on a mystery that had, at that point, precisely one clue: a ladder going down into black. I've made a lot of videos on this channel about Season 1, and almost every single one of them ends at that hole in the ground, because that's where the season leaves you, and that's where the promise sits. So this video is the payoff. This is the one where we go down the ladder. What was actually inside the hatch, why it turned out to be so much stranger than anyone theorized, what the button really was, and why the answer to the show's biggest question managed to be more interesting than the question, which is not a sentence you get to say about most mystery shows. Fair warning before we start, because this is a break from what I usually do, this video has full spoilers for Season 1 and Season 2. If you're still in Season 1 and you've been watching my spoiler-free stuff, stop here, go finish, come back, I'll wait. Everyone else, let's go down. On-screen chapter, Part 1, Down the Ladder, what was actually down there. Here's the thing about the reveal, and it's the first sign that this show knew exactly what it was doing. Season 2 doesn't open on the survivors. It opens on a man you have never seen before, alone, underground. The very first shot of Season 2 is an eye-opening, the same visual grammar the show used to introduce Jack in the pilot, which is not an accident. A man wakes up in a bed. He gets up. He puts on a record, Mama Cass, Make Your Own Kind of Music, and he goes about a morning routine with the mechanical precision of someone who has done it 10,000 times. He exercises. He gives himself an injection. He makes a smoothie. And the camera drifts through this space, and you slowly realize what you're looking at: a full functional 1970s era living quarters. Kitchen, bunk, shower, bookshelves, wired electricity, fluorescent lights, a working record player. Then something rumbles overhead. He grabs a gun and points it at the ceiling, and the camera finally pulls back and up, out through the roof, up the concrete shaft, and out into the jungle, to the 2 men standing at the top of the hole, staring down into what we now know is not darkness at all. It's a bunker. Somebody lives in it. I want to sit on how good that opening is for a second, because it does something very difficult. Every fan theory going into Season 2 was some version of what's in the hole: a monster, a spaceship, a laboratory, nothing at all. Almost nobody's theory was a guy is living down there, and he's been doing his morning workout every day for 3 years while we were all running around up top. The reveal isn't just an answer, it's a total reframe of the show's geography. For a whole season, the survivors have been living on the surface of this island thinking they were alone with its mysteries, and the show has just told you there was a man with a record player under your feet the entire time. His name is Desmond, and he is, without much competition, the best character the show introduces in its 2nd season. Desmond Hume is a Scotsman with a beard down to his chest, a paranoid streak the size of the island, and a habit of calling everyone brother. He's been living in this bunker for 3 years, alone. And he is extremely, immediately, violently uninterested in the question the survivors want answered, because he has a question of his own, which he screams at Jack within about 90 seconds of meeting him, and which turns out to be the actual center of the entire season. Are you him? What did one snowman say to the other snowman? He's checking a password. He thinks Jack might be his replacement. And when Jack doesn't have the answer, Desmond does what a man alone underground for 3 years does. He panics, waves a gun around, and demands to know if the survivors have come to relieve him of a job he cannot stop doing, which brings us to the job. On-screen chapter, part 2, the button and the numbers. In the middle of this bunker, there's a computer, not a modern one, a chunky, beige, late 70s terminal with a monochrome screen wired into the wall like it grew there, and above it, mounted on the wall, is a countdown timer. Split flap, mechanical, the kind you used to see in old train stations, clacking down one number at a time. The timer counts down from 108 minutes. And when it gets close to 0, an alarm starts. Somebody has to walk to that computer and type in a sequence of numbers and press execute. The timer resets to 1 and 8. And the whole thing starts again. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. There it is. If you've watched my video on the numbers, you know how much weight this show had already put on those 6 digits by this point. A cursed lottery ticket, a distress signal looping for 16 years, 6 numbers stamped into the metal of a door. And now here they are again as an input, a password, something a human being has to physically type into a keyboard over and over every 108 minutes, forever. And here's the detail that made an entire internet lose its mind, because it's the kind of thing that rewards exactly the obsessive theorizing the show had spent a season training people to do. Add the numbers together. 4 plus 8 plus 15 plus 16 plus 23 plus 42, 108. The numbers are the timer. The timer is the numbers. The thing Hurley thought was a curse on his life turns out to be the operating interval of a machine buried under an island on the other side of the world, and he finds this out by walking into a concrete room and looking at a clock. That's not a plot point. That's a magic trick. So that's the job. That's what Desmond has been doing alone for 3 years. Every 108 minutes, waking, sleeping, sick, sane, insane, walk to the computer, type 6 numbers, press execute. If you don't, something happens. Desmond doesn't know what. Nobody knows what. The instructions don't say. And I want to spend a moment on what that actually does to a person, because the show is unusually interested in the texture of this job rather than just its stakes. 108 minutes is a horrible interval. Think about it practically. It's too long to sit and stare at the clock. You'd lose your mind inside a week. But it's far too short to have a life. You cannot sleep a full night. You cannot walk to the far side of the island and back. You cannot get properly sick, or badly injured, or drunk, or so sad that you stop functioning for an afternoon. Everything you do has to fit inside 108 minutes, forever, and the alarm does not care what you were in the middle of. It isn't a prison sentence exactly. It's worse than that. It's a leash with a very specific length, and the show makes you feel every inch of it. Watch what it does to the survivors once they inherit it. They set up a rota. They argue about shifts. People who have survived a plane crash, a monster, and a kidnapping start snapping at each other over scheduling because the button turns time itself into a scarce resource. There's something quietly brilliant in that the show takes its most cosmic mystery and renders it day to day as an irritating chore nobody wants to cover, which is exactly how it would actually feel. The apocalypse as an unpopular shift. There's also the strange domestic question of how the swan gets resupplied, which produces one of my favorite pieces of world building in the season. Periodically, a pallet of food drops out of the sky, crates of Dharma branded goods, everything from cereal to ranch dressing, all stamped with that same friendly hexagonal logo, parachuted down from an aircraft nobody ever sees. Nobody knows who's still making the drops. Nobody knows who's still packing the crates for a research initiative that supposedly collapsed decades ago. It's an automated kindness from a dead institution, and it raises the same unnerving question the orientation film does. Somebody, somewhere, is still running the logistics on this place. The island isn't abandoned, it's unattended, which is a much stranger and more frightening word. And that nobody knows what is the engine of the entire second season. Because think about what the show has actually done here structurally. It took its biggest, most anticipated mystery, what's in the hatch, and it answered it immediately in the first episode. No stalling. The door opens, you go down. Here's what's inside: a man, a bunker, a computer, a button. Question answered. And in the same motion, it replaced that question with a much better one. Not what's down there, but what happens if we stop. That's the trick that makes season 2 work, and it's worth naming clearly because it's the thing a lot of mystery shows never figure out. An answer doesn't have to close a door. A good answer opens a bigger one. There's a bunker is trivia. There's a bunker and a man in it, and if he stops pressing a button every 108 minutes, he believes the world might end, and he has no idea whether that's true. That's a premise. That'll run a season. On-screen chapter, part 3. The orientation film, the Dharma Initiative. So who built this thing? The answer arrives in the form of one of the most beloved artifacts in the entire series, an orientation film. It's a 16mm reel, spliced and scratched, that the survivors find in the bunker and project against the concrete wall. And what plays is a corporate training video, the exact tone and texture of a 1970s workplace safety film, complete with a soothing narrator, a lab coat, and a little animated logo. The narrator introduces himself as Dr. Marvin Candle, and he explains, in the calm voice of a man reading an instruction manual, that the survivors are standing inside Station 3 of something called the Dharma Initiative. The Dharma Initiative, according to the film, was a large-scale research project founded in 1970 by two doctoral candidates out of the University of Michigan, funded by an industrialist named Alvar Hanso, dedicated to research in meteorology, psychology, parapsychology, zoology, electromagnetism, and this is the phrase that gets everyone, utopian social science. A commune of scientists on this island, building stations, running experiments, living in barracks, filming orientation reels for their staff. The station they're standing in is called the Swan, and the film tells them what the Swan is for. Sort of. It explains that following an incident, the station's purpose changed, that every 108 minutes, the code must be entered into the computer. That the assigned team is not, and the film is very firm about this, to use the computer for any other purpose. And then the film ends, and the survivors are left staring at a wall, having received a set of instructions with no explanation attached to any of them. What's the incident? Don't ask. What happens if you don't push it? Not covered. Why can't you use the computer for anything else? Moving on. Namaste, and good luck. I love this scene, and I want to explain why beyond the obvious. The orientation film is the show discovering its best possible register for delivering mythology, because everything about that film is mundane. It's shot like corporate training. The narrator has the cadence of a man explaining fire exits. The logo is a nice, friendly hexagonal design. And the content is completely insane, a secret research collective, an unexplained incident, a doomsday-adjacent button on an island that shouldn't exist. The gap between the bureaucratic delivery and the cosmic content is where all the unease lives. It's the same instinct as a polar bear in a jungle, put the impossible thing in the most ordinary possible frame and let the contrast do the work. It also quietly changes the entire scale of the show. Up until this point, Season 1's island is an eerie natural place, a jungle with a monster in it, a place where strange things happen. The Dharma reveal makes it a sight. Somebody studied this, somebody funded it, staffed it, built concrete facilities in it, wrote procedures for it, printed logos for it. The island stops being supernatural and starts being classified, which, if anything, is more frightening because it means somebody knew and decided the correct response was a filing system. And of course, the Dharma Initiative isn't here anymore. The stations are still running, the food drops still arrive, but the people who built all this are gone, and nobody in the bunker knows where they went, or why, or how long ago. The survivors have inherited a job from a dead organization, with no way to ask a single follow-up question. On-screen chapter. Part 4, Desmond, how Desmond got there. The best thing Season 2 does with the hatch is refuse to treat it as a puzzle box. It treats it as a place where a man lost 3 years of his life, and it makes you feel every one of them. Desmond's story comes out in pieces across the season, and the full shape of it is genuinely tragic. He didn't crash here, he sailed. Desmond was competing in a solo around-the-world sailing race, a race he entered to prove something to a man named Charles Widmore, the father of the woman he loved, who made it exceptionally clear that Desmond was not good enough for his daughter. Her name is Penny, Penelope Widmore, and she is the entire reason Desmond does anything. The race went badly. A storm wrecked his boat, and Desmond washed up unconscious on the shore of an island that isn't on any map, where he was found and dragged underground by a man named Kelvin Inman, an American, ex-military, who was at that point running the Swan alone. Kelvin taught him the job. Every 108 minutes, type the numbers, press execute. Kelvin gave him the password protocol, the snowman joke, so that whoever came next could prove they were legitimate. And Kelvin also told him what would happen if the button wasn't pushed. In the vaguest possible terms, the world ends. That's it. That's the whole training. So Desmond does it. For years. 2 men splitting shifts in a concrete bunker, keeping a countdown from reaching 0, with no evidence that any of it matters and no way to leave. And then the story turns, and this is where Desmond stops being a strange bearded man with a gun and becomes one of the most sympathetic characters in the show. Desmond discovers that Kelvin has been lying to him, that Kelvin has been going outside into the world Desmond has been told is contaminated and unsafe, and secretly repairing Desmond's wrecked sailboat, planning to leave the island alone and abandon Desmond to the button forever. Desmond confronts him. There's a fight. Kelvin falls, hits his head on a rock, and dies. It's an accident, and it doesn't matter that it's an accident because Desmond is now a man who has killed the only other person on Earth who knew he existed, and he has to run back down the ladder because the alarm is going off. He makes it. Barely. The timer gets past 0, the split flaps start turning over to red hieroglyphics, the whole bunker starts to shake, something enormous starts happening, and Desmond gets the code in at the last possible second, and it stops. And he's alone, completely alone with the job for the next 3 years. There's a moment in Desmond's story that I think is the emotional high point of the entire season, and it's small. At his lowest, genuinely at the end, having decided he can't do this anymore, Desmond pulls a book off the shelf. A copy of Our Mutual Friend by Dickens, the one Dickens novel he's been saving because he decided years ago it would be the last thing he ever reads before he dies. And inside it is a letter from Penny, written before the race, tucked into his book without him knowing, telling him that whatever happens, she will always be waiting, and that all he has to do is come back to her. The man in the concrete room, 3 years in, keeping the world from ending on the word of a dead stranger, has one piece of evidence that anybody out there remembers he's alive. That's what the hatch is, underneath all the mythology. It's a room where somebody's life stopped. On-screen chapter. Part 5, The War Over the Button, Jack versus Locke Now. Here's where the hatch stops being a mystery and becomes a war. Because once the survivors take over the button, they have to answer a question that has no evidence on either side. Is any of this real? There is no proof the button does anything. There's a scratched training film made by an organization that no longer exists, and a paranoid Scotsman's second-hand account of what a dead man told him. That's the entire case. Meanwhile, the cost of believing is enormous. It means chaining human beings to a computer in shifts forever for the rest of their lives on faith. If you've watched my videos on Jack and on Locke, you know exactly where each of these men lands, and you know why this argument was inevitable from the first season. Locke believes. Of course he believes. This is a man who was told his whole life what he couldn't do, who got his legs back the moment he arrived here, who decided the island had a purpose for him specifically. The hatch was his obsession. He dug for it, bled for it. Someone died helping him get to it. And now that it's open, the island has handed him something no one else in his life ever did. A job that matters? Locke pushing the button isn't data entry. It's worship. He has been waiting his entire life for something to be asked of him, and here it is every 108 minutes, forever. He'd do it gladly. Jack refuses. Also, of course, Jack is a man of evidence, a surgeon, someone who needs to see the mechanism before he'll accept the effect. He looks at the same room and sees a scratched film and a countdown clock, and a man who's been alone too long, and he concludes, reasonably, that there's no reason to believe any of it. Jack's position is the position most rational people would take, and what makes this the best conflict the show ever built is that neither of them is arguing about the button. They're arguing about themselves. Locke needs the button to be real because if it isn't, then he's just a lucky man who used to be in a wheelchair and nothing about him is chosen. Jack needs it to be fake because if a countdown clock in a bunker can hold up the sky, then the universe runs on rules he can't operate on, and a man who couldn't save his own father has to ask why the rules never bent for him. Their argument is never about probability. It's about what each of them can survive believing. Which is exactly the same thing I said about them in my Season 1 videos. The difference is that Season 2 finally gives them a concrete object to have the fight over, and a timer that forces a decision every 108 minutes. They compromise sort of the way people do. They take shifts. They push the button. Locke does it with reverence, and Jack does it with contempt, and the season lets the tension sit there and grind. On-screen chapter, Part 6, The Doubt the Pearl, and The Cruelest Possibility. Before we get to what breaks that stalemate, there's one more thing hidden inside the swan that I have to talk about, because it's the single most obsessed over image the show ever produced, and it exists purely as a reward for people paying attention. Midway through the season, the station's blast doors come down, enormous steel shutters designed to seal off sections of the bunker during a lockdown. Locke ends up pinned underneath one of them, injured, alone, with the power out, and in the dark, the emergency lighting flicks over to ultraviolet, and the blast door lights up. Someone, some previous occupant of this station at some point in the past, covered the inside of that door in a vast, dense, hand-drawn map, painted in a substance only visible under UV light so that it could only ever be seen during a lockdown when nobody else was around to catch you looking. It's a map of the island's stations. Concentric circles, connecting lines, station names, and symbols, and crammed into every available space, notes, Latin phrases, equations, questions, corrections. Increasingly frantic annotations by someone trying to work out what this island is on the only surface in the building nobody would ever inspect. Desmond later gives it a name. The man who drew it was Radzinski, the person who ran the Swan before Kelvin, who worked out the UV trick, who spent his time down there mapping an island he could never leave, and who eventually killed himself in that bunker. Kelvin never told Desmond much about him. The map is most of what's left. I love this because of what it says about the shape of the whole story. Every person who has ever been down here has done the same two things, pushed the button, and quietly tried to figure out what they were pushing it for. Radzinski drew a map in invisible ink. Desmond kept a logbook and read Dickens. The survivors argue and take shifts and search for documents. It's the same behavior, over and over, by different people separated by decades, the compulsion to understand the machine you're chained to. The Swan isn't just a station. It's a place that has been slowly driving a succession of intelligent people insane in exactly the same way, and the map is the physical evidence of the one who got there first. And then, about 2/3 of the way through the season, the show does something genuinely nasty to John Locke. Locke and Mr. Eco, and I need to introduce Eco properly here because he matters enormously to this story, discover another station. Eco is one of the survivors from the tail section of the plane, a Nigerian man with an extraordinarily heavy past who now carries a wooden stick covered in carved scripture. He is, in this season, the show's other man of faith, but where Locke's faith is about being chosen, Eco's is about penance. He doesn't need the island to have picked him. He believes the work is the point. Together, Locke and Eco find a second bunker, the Pearl. And inside it is another orientation film. This one is much worse. The Pearl film explains in the same soothing corporate voice that the Pearl is a psychological research station. Its staff sat in a room in front of monitors, watching the occupants of another station perform their duties, and dutifully recorded everything those people did in notebooks. Every observation was to be logged. The notebooks were then to be sent via pneumatic tube to be collated and analyzed. And the monitors in the Pearl are pointed at the Swan. Sit with what that means. It means there is a documented, filmed, official possibility that the button was never real at all. That the Dharma Initiative built a fake apocalypse, put 2 people in a bunker, told them the world would end if they stopped typing, and then sat in a room next door taking notes on how long they'd keep doing it. That the experiment was never the electromagnetism. The experiment was the believers, which makes Locke the man who found the door, who bled to open it, who reorganized his entire sense of purpose around this task. The punchline of a joke played by scientists who died decades ago. The show gives that revelation to Locke, of all people, and watching him process it is genuinely painful. This is a man whose entire identity rests on the proposition that things happen for a reason and that he was brought here specifically. And he has just watched a film that suggests he's a lab rat in a cage, pressing a lever for a pellet that was never coming. So Locke breaks. And in a beautiful inversion, Eco doesn't. Eco takes over the button while Locke collapses into doubt, the 2 faith positions swapping places, because Eco's faith was never contingent on being special. There's a line of Eco's I think about constantly. When he's asked why he keeps pushing it, he says he does it because he believes it needs to be done, not because he's been promised anything. That's the difference between the 2 men, and season 2 is smart enough to know it's a real difference. Meanwhile, and this is the show at its most vicious, Locke, now a non-believer, decides to run the experiment. He decides to let the timer hit 0 to find out. On-screen chapter? Part 7, The Discharge. What happens if you don't push it? The finale of Season 2 is called Live Together, Die Alone, which is a callback to Jack's Season 1 thesis, and also, as it turns out, a description of exactly what Desmond does. Here's how the Hatch story ends. Locke, in full crisis, refuses to push the button and physically prevents anyone else from doing it. Eco fights him for it. Desmond, who by now has learned something crucial, is down there with them, and the timer runs out. What happens when the timer runs out is not nothing. The split flaps turn over to symbols. A magnetic force begins building in the station, not metaphorically, magnetically. Anything ferrous in the room starts flying toward the walls. Forks, chains, the metal shelving, a gun, an entire pallet. The concrete starts to crack. The sound is unbearable. Whatever is behind that wall is enormous, and it is waking up, and it is very obviously going to level the island if it isn't stopped. The button was real. But here's the part that's better than the button was real, and it's the reason this finale lands. Desmond figures out something nobody else has. Earlier in the season, he found a journal, the logbook of the Swan, a record of every button push. And in that log, among thousands of routine entries, there is a note about a system failure, an anomaly, a date, and a time. The date is the day Oceanic 815 crashed. Desmond realizes what happened. On that day, 3 years into his stay, Desmond had a moment of despair. He just found Penny's letter, he had just decided he couldn't keep going, and he failed to push the button on time. Magnetic buildup started. It lasted for about half a minute. And in that half a minute, an airliner passing 30,000 feet overhead was pulled out of the sky, broke apart over the island, and dropped 48 people onto a beach. Desmond crashed the plane. Every single thing you have watched for 2 seasons, every death, every character, every mystery, Jack and Kate and Locke and Sawyer, all of it, happened because a lonely Scotsman in a bunker had a bad night and was 30 seconds late to a keyboard. That's the moment Season 2 has been building toward, and it's one of the great reveals in the show's history because it retroactively makes the button matter in the past as well as the future. The mystery of Season 1 and the mystery of Season 2 turn out to be the same mystery, viewed from opposite ends. So Desmond does the last thing available to him. Under the floor of the Swan, there is a failsafe, a key, buried behind a concrete wall that Kelvin showed him once that will discharge the entire electromagnetic pocket at the cost of, in Kelvin's words, whoever turns it. It's a suicide switch. And Desmond, a man who has spent 3 years keeping a door shut on behalf of a world that forgot he existed, tells Locke he's going to see his wife, apologizes for the fact that he never got to do the same, and turns the key. The sky turns violet. There's a sound like the world inhaling. Metal shrieks. Everything within a huge radius is bathed in white light and a low, physical hum, and then it's over. The hatch is gone. The crater is gone. The station has been destroyed from the inside out. And in a small research outpost in the middle of nowhere on the other side of the planet, 2 men monitoring a screen see a magnetic anomaly spike. One of them picks up a satellite phone and says in Portuguese that they think they found it. And on the other end of that call is Penelope Widmore. That's how Season 2 ends. The button was real. A man died pressing the ultimate version of it, and the discharge that resulted may have just told the outside world exactly where this island is. On-screen chapter, Part 8. Why it worked. Why the answer was better than the question. So let's step back and look at what this whole story actually accomplished, because I think The Hatch is the single best sustained piece of mystery writing the show ever did, and it's worth being specific about why. First, it answered its question fast. The #1 failure mode of mystery box television is hoarding. A show gets a great question, discovers the question is popular, and then protects it. Stretching, teasing, refusing to resolve because the question feels like the asset. Lost had the single most anticipated question in television going into Season 2, and it answered it in the first 20 minutes of the premiere. Down the ladder, here's a bunker, here's a man. Done. That's confidence, and it buys enormous goodwill because it teaches the audience that this show pays. Second, the answer generated a better question. What's in the hatch is a trivia question. Any answer to it is a noun. What happens if we stop pushing the button is a dramatic question because it can only be answered by someone making a choice and because it puts a moral weight on the characters rather than on the writers. The show traded a mystery you solve for a mystery you argue about. That's an upgrade in kind, not just in degree. Third, it turned mythology into character conflict. This is the part I think people underrate most. The button could easily have been a lore delivery system, a machine that exists so characters can find documents about it. Instead, the show welded it to the show's central relationship. Jack and Locke had been circling each other for a full season, arguing about faith in the abstract. The button gave that argument a physical object, a deadline, and a body count. Every 108 minutes, someone had to act on their worldview. You cannot ask for a better dramatic engine than that. Fourth, it was willing to make its believer look like a fool and then vindicate him at maximum cost. The Pearl Station reveal is genuinely cruel to Locke, and the show sits in that cruelty for episodes. It lets him lose his faith. It lets him take the whole island hostage over it. And then it proves him right, but in a way that gives him no satisfaction whatsoever, because the vindication arrives inside a catastrophe that kills a man and destroys the station. Being right about the button costs Locke everything and comforts him not at all. That's a much braver choice than either he was right all along or he was deluded all along. Fifth, it closed the loop backward. This is the technical masterstroke. When Desmond realizes the anomaly in the logbook lines up with the crash of 815, the show fuses its two biggest mysteries into a single object. The hatch didn't just sit under the island for 2 seasons, it caused the show. Everything you've watched is downstream of it. A mystery that turns out to have been the origin of the entire story is a rare, extraordinarily satisfying structure, and it makes a rewatch of Season 1 land completely differently. Every time somebody in Season 1 stands near that door and doesn't know what it is, you now know it's the reason they're standing there at all. And there's a cost ledger worth reading too, because this show keeps one. Look at what this door actually took from people across 2 seasons. Boone died helping Locke chase it before they even knew what it was. Radzinski, whoever he was, lost his mind and his life in that room, drawing a map nobody was meant to see. Kelvin died on a rock because the job made a liar out of him. Desmond lost 3 years and then gave up the rest to turn the key. Iko takes on the button as penance and it costs him dearly. Locke loses the one thing he'd built himself out of, the certainty that he was chosen, and gets it handed back to him only in the worst possible way. That's a remarkable body count for a piece of furniture, but it's also why the hatch works as a story rather than a puzzle. The show never once lets it be free. Every answer about that station is paid for by somebody. And finally, the thing that ties all of it together, the hatch has a person in it. That sounds obvious, but it's the difference between this and 100 imitators. The Swan is not a puzzle. It's a room where Desmond Hume lost 3 years, killed a man by accident, read a letter from a woman he'll never see again, and decided to die pushing the biggest version of the button he'd been pushing all along. All the lore in the world, Dharma, the initiative, the incident, the electromagnetism, is scaffolding around a guy who was really, really lonely and did the job anyway. That's why the answer was better than the question. What's in the hatch got answered in 20 minutes. What does it cost a person to keep the world running when nobody's watching and nobody will ever know? Took a whole season, and it's the actual subject. The hatch is gone by the end of Season 2. Blown out, imploded, a crater in the jungle where the most important door in television used to be. Locke, Iko, and Desmond walk out of the blast in different states of wreckage, and the show moves on to bigger and stranger things. But that first season and a half, the door in the ground, the man with the record player, the 6 numbers on a keyboard, the timer that never stops, that's the stretch where this show proved it could actually deliver on a promise. It made a whole planet obsessed with a door. And then it opened it, and what was behind it was a man, a countdown, and a genuinely impossible question about faith. That's not a mystery show getting lucky. That's a mystery show knowing exactly what it's doing. If you want the Season 1 side of all this, I've got spoiler-free videos on Jack, Kate, Locke, Sawyer, Charlie, Boone, and Shannon, the numbers, and a full breakdown of what made that first season work. Go pull whichever thread you want, and tell me in the comments if you'd been down there. Are you pushing the button or are you letting it run out? Because I'm not entirely sure I'd have Locke's nerve, and I'm not sure I'd have Jack's either. Subscribing genuinely helps a small channel like this one keep going. Thanks for watching. See you in another life, brother.